Aurora Arkeia stood at the edge of the crystal observatory, her toes curled over the precipice as she gazed out upon the endless expanse of starlight. The soft hum of energy from the nearby quantum computer pulsed through her suit, a constant reminder of the fragile balance between technology and nature on this distant planet. "Your projections indicate an unstable celestial event?" Asher Vex asked, his voice echoing off the crystal as he approached Aurora through the observation window's transparent lattice. "The probability of catastrophic impact to our research station is pegged at 87.32%. Aurora turned, her eyes narrowing slightly behind the silver-rimmed lenses of her helmet visor. "Unstable doesn't even begin to describe it, Asher. The entire sector is experiencing unforeseen anomalies, distortions that threaten to rip apart our very understanding of celestial mechanics." Asher hesitated for a moment before falling into step beside Aurora. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper as they walked toward the observatory's interior. "You can't believe your findings are simply coincidental, not even when faced with evidence? Something far more sinister is at play here." Aurora shot him a wry glance. "Your propensity for speculation is getting out of hand, friend." As she spoke, her eyes drifted toward the observation deck's focal axis, toward the star around which their station circled, the enigmatic blue-white giant Kaidos 4, whose radiation output continued to defy explanation by all logical scientific standards. Their walk was uninterrupted until they reached the computer core room. Inside, engineers huddled around a holographic display matrix, projecting an animated image of the galaxy that resembled some bizarre form of celestial tapestry, a chaotic maelstrom born from infinite variables and anomalies. Aurora halted at a console and accessed the data. Her gaze swept across waveforms and charts as her mind began piecing together disparate elements. Suddenly, a hidden harmonic structure among Kaidos 4's quantum fluctuations leapt out at her, a rhythm encoded within the star's radiation. "You're trying to tell me it's not just a case of entropy?" Asher ventured, watching the data cascade across Aurora's console screen. "Not simply," she replied. Her voice caught on something unspoken. "Those patterns have been replicated in Kaidos 4's resonance frequencies. There are two harmonic cycles here, each pulsing through each other at their fundamental frequency." She stepped closer to get a better look at the hologram. An unsettling realization was unfolding, even as she struggled to believe her findings. "This is impossible," Asher muttered, scanning the matrix. "You're suggesting Kaidos 4 has more than one heart?" The scientist didn't laugh. She reached for a comms unit on her belt, thumb poised over its activation key. Her words would now broadcast throughout the station's entire system, destined to become part of a historic conversation, one that would lead humanity toward an unforeseen future, shrouded by unknown stars. Aurora's voice echoed through the comms system, her words sending ripples of excitement and skepticism throughout the research station. "We're witnessing a phenomenon that challenges everything we thought we knew about celestial mechanics," she declared. "The star Kaidos 4 is exhibiting two harmonic cycles, each interacting with the other at their fundamental frequency." Dr. Eleanor Quasar, the station's director, responded swiftly, his voice tinged with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Aurora, can you elaborate on this claim? We need to understand what we're dealing with here." As Aurora began to walk toward the conference lounge, Asher fell into step beside her, his eyes fixed intently on the data streaming across his own console screen. "I've reviewed the matrices, and I have to agree, this is unprecedented," he said quietly. In the conference lounge, the station's team gathered around a holographic display, their faces illuminated by the soft blue glow of the interface. Dr. Quasar nodded for Aurora to proceed, her hands moving deftly as she summoned a projection of Kaidos 4's resonance frequencies onto the matrix. The star's radiation output pulsed and throbbed, like a dynamic entity striving to break free from its confines. It was mesmerizing, yet unnerving. This strange, rhythmic behavior seemed to defy all logic and reason. Aurora felt a shiver run down her spine as Asher leaned in closer, his eyes locked intently on the data. "Asher, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Dr. Quasar asked, his voice laced with a hint of trepidation. This is not just a cosmic anomaly, it's a doorway into the unknown." Aurora cleared her throat, buying time as she weighed her next words carefully. I believe we're looking at something that transcends our understanding of celestial mechanics, she began, her voice steady and deliberate. What if Kaidos 4 isn't just one star, but two, or even more? The room fell silent, the only sound the soft hum of the holographic display as it continued to spin and pulse with data. The team's faces turned toward Aurora, their eyes wide with a mix of fascination and terror. What are you suggesting? Dr. Quasar pressed, his voice rising in incredulity. That we're dealing with some kind of star cluster, or worse. Aurora took a deep breath, her thoughts racing ahead to the implications of such a discovery. She glanced around the room, her eyes meeting Asher's as he raised an eyebrow. We need more data, she said firmly, turning back to the holographic display. We have to unlock the secrets hidden within this incredible phenomenon. As the team embarked on their new quest for knowledge, Aurora couldn't shake off a nagging sense of foreboding that they were merely scratching the surface of something much larger, much more mysterious, and potentially catastrophic in its consequences. Aurora's words still lingered in the minds of the research team as they converged around their primary console, eager to delve deeper into the celestial mystery unfolding before them. Dr. Quasar nodded for Asher to proceed with his analysis, his eyes already scanning the holographic display matrix that cast a kaleidoscope of colors across the room. What I see is unprecedented, Asher began, his voice measured and clinical. Kaidos 4's energy signature has developed a harmonic component, not just a simple resonance frequency. We're witnessing an actual pulse embedded within its radiation pattern. It's like, have you ever heard the sound of two crystals tuning to each other? Aurora nodded, recalling that analogy Asher had presented early in their investigation. I'm going to try something, he said quietly, his fingers dancing across his console's keyboard. Let's extract those energy patterns. Maybe we can isolate each component within the harmonic cycle. Eleanor Quasar approached Aurora as she leaned against an edge of the team workspace, her eyes fixed on Asher's screens. Your findings raise more questions than answers, the director said. I've considered that, sir, she replied calmly. There could be another entity, a celestial heartbeat in parallel with Kaidos 4, or whatever this harmonic interaction reveals. Their discussion flowed unencumbered until an urgent alarm cut through the space's steady hum. Aurora recognized it as the research station's primary early warning system for anomalies outside projected stability criteria. Drifting stellar energy levels detected, sector perimeter breached. Quasar immediately reacted to the alert. He exchanged glances with Asher before issuing a series of swift directives over their comms unit, setting in motion an immediate response plan, sealing off potential hazards from areas beyond lab controls. Aurora, Quasar called out as she followed Asher's gaze toward screens flickering with raw energy feed data. You'll need to consult sector defense teams and our astrotheorist regarding what might induce such instability. In any case, let's treat everything around Kaidos 4 like a ticking universe, one that could potentially upset ours. A faint tremble ran through her muscles as a sense of urgency spread through the space, casting an undercurrent of tension over their investigation despite its early successes. Suddenly, a low-pitched hum from the lab section gave way to intense vibrations. The ground shifted beneath their feet, throwing all members temporarily off balance before the station's counter-vibration dampeners steadied the platform's steady state. Though alarm lights on security stations went red, asteroid cluster intercepted outside perimeter, estimated size 3 kilometers. We need it cleared, one of the lab technicians interjected with a sense of urgency from his console near sector sensors monitoring real-time updates. Asher took over that concern immediately, coordinating a defense response team to deflect any possible asteroid collision damage and keep their investigation on track. The way we see this developing, Eleanor Quasar spoke aloud once more, as an emergency meeting became clear need for all members of the team present there. I think one simple fact stands out. Nothing we were studying makes sense. No amount of theoretical work could have covered everything. For a brief instant, faces met to absorb this truth before looking back at screens to analyze the rapidly unfolding situation in real time. Dr. Aurora navigated through the crowded laboratory with a determination that only hours of crisis could instill. Her usually neat research station was now scattered with papers, consoles, and hastily scribbled equations, all reflecting her relentless pursuit to grasp the essence of Kaidos 4's mysterious harmonic activity. Astral physics is no longer about patterns or principles alone, Asher said with urgency as he monitored real-time energy updates on his console, eyes strained but focused. The very fabric of our observations has changed. As he glanced over at her with unspoken questions, Aurora felt an odd sense of camaraderie, not just for deciphering celestial riddles together, but in being witness to the unfolding anomaly. A team member rushed past them both, heading towards Quasar's administrative console at the edge of the main lab area. We require clarification on current energy readings and implications, he explained when intercepted by the director en route. Eleanor Quasar motioned in understanding as a deep breath preceded his prompt action to communicate further directions over comms, their entire strategy hanging in precarious balance. Asher followed up swiftly with detailed status calls from sensor platforms near sector perimeter, keeping tabs of all real data fed into monitoring. It seemed he was aware every second counted now. According to these figures, Dr. Quasar's urgent voice continued as they shared vital information at the speed required by an ever-changing crisis situation unfolding ahead. Any momentary misalignment in stabilizers may be the difference between saving equipment or having to restart entire sectors. A faint tremor beneath their feet made Aurora raise an eyebrow. A soft murmur came from around that end of the lab, too. Technicians and researchers were quietly adjusting sector controls at maximum capacity, coordinating a unified counter-stabilization protocol. The flickering light from her console captured her attention. Data input for sector energy pattern mapping was becoming increasingly urgent as readings reached new levels never before observed, in stark contrast to the steady radiation signatures they had analyzed during initial missions. Wait 1. Doctor, Quasar called softly over comms while reviewing data sent real-time, indicating that team operations must now adapt. Asher approached a corner station near the Space Lab area and consulted further findings fed into sector displays by his part of the response effort, in tandem with sector operations teams working at maximum capacity to address rapidly changing data as an immediate priority. An urgent message from Quasar cut them off. Our stabilizers need real-time feed adjustments, everyone. Asher? A calm nod was exchanged, a shared thought mirrored on both their faces, each knowing every detail counted in this unfolding crisis. What I see now is our stabilization algorithm isn't being followed precisely, Doctor. Asher explained carefully but swiftly as he reworked the calculations needed for sector countervibrations to align with new data streaming toward them from outside their stabilized space bubble. A sudden sharp click through the lab indicated another update from nearby engineering teams who were attempting to stabilize periphery energy signatures and possibly stabilize this newly emerging high-energy cluster. The hum of the lab's machinery provided a steady background noise as Dr. Aurora carefully navigated through the crowded area, her eyes scanning the scattered consoles and hastily scribbled equations on every available surface. The usually neat research station was now a testament to the chaos that had erupted in response to Kaidos 4's mysterious harmonic activity. Astrophysics is no longer about patterns or principles alone, Asher said, his voice laced with urgency as he monitored real-time energy updates on his console. His eyes were strained but focused, reflecting the weight of their investigation and its increasingly dire circumstances. A team member rushed past them both, heading towards Quasar's administrative console at the edge of the main lab area. We require clarification on current energy readings and implications, the technician explained when intercepted by the director en route. Eleanor Quasar motioned understanding before responding with a deep breath. According to these figures, he began, his voice steady but urgent, any momentary misalignment in stabilizers may be the difference between saving equipment or having to restart entire sectors. The faint tremor beneath their feet made Aurora raise an eyebrow as she continued to study real-time data feeding into sector energy pattern mapping. Her console flickered with urgency as readings reached new levels never before observed, a stark contrast to the steady radiation signatures they had analyzed during initial missions. "Wait one," Quasar called softly over comms, indicating that team operations must adapt to the changing circumstances. Asher immediately shifted his focus to sector displays near the Space Lab area, consulting further findings fed into the real-time feed adjustments needed for sector counter-vibrations to align with new data streaming toward them from outside their stabilized space bubble. Their attention snapped to a sudden sharp click through the lab, an update from nearby engineering teams attempting to stabilize periphery energy signatures and possibly contain the high-energy cluster. Focus returned to Aurora's eyes as she gazed intently at her console, searching for any hint of a solution hidden in the chaos. "Real-time feed adjustments are now in effect," Quasar announced over comms, his voice firm but laced with caution. "Asher, how are stabilizers performing?" A nod came from Asher's direction before his soft explanation filled the void. "Our algorithm isn't being followed precisely. We need to revise calculations for sector counter-vibrations. Real-time feed indicates that if we don't adjust promptly, equipment might fail." An unspoken message seemed to pass between Aurora and Asher as they exchanged glances, each understanding the weight of their task. The crisis unfolding before them demanded maximum teamwork and precision under pressure. The hum of the lab's machinery provided a steady background noise as Dr. Aurora carefully navigated through the crowded area, her eyes scanning the scattered consoles and hastily scribbled equations on every available surface. The chaotic layout was a testament to the frantic efforts of the team trying to stabilize the periphery energy signatures. "I'm going to need access to those readings from Sector 3, Asher called out, his voice laced with urgency as he consulted further findings fed into sector displays near the Space Lab area. Astrid, one of the technicians, hastily obliged, forwarding the data to Asher's console. "They're not responding to stabilizer feed adjustments," she said, her brow furrowed in concern. "This is no longer a pattern stabilization issue," Aurora interjected, her eyes locked on the streaming data feeding into sector energy pattern mapping. "The readings are deviating from predicted values at an exponential rate. We need to revise our calculations for sector counter-vibrations," Asher urged, his fingers flying across the console as he worked on adjusting the algorithm. Quasar's voice over comms cut through the urgency. "Asher, can you give me a status update on stabilizer performance?" "Stabilizers are holding, but it won't last without adjustments," Asher replied, his brow set in determination. "Real-time feed indicates that our equipment is under strain." A sharp click echoed through the lab as engineering teams continued their efforts to stabilize periphery energy signatures and contain the high-energy cluster. The team's attention snapped back to Aurora's console, where data streaming in was becoming increasingly erratic. "Stabilizer alignment has critical," Quasar announced, his voice firm but laced with caution. "Asher, can you confirm calculations for sector counter-vibrations?" Asher nodded tightly, his eyes fixed on the console as he worked at breakneck speed to revise their approach. The lab's noise level increased as machines adapted to the rapid data changes and technicians frantically adjusted controls. "We have a narrow window," Asher warned, voice firm and steady. "If we don't adjust for resonant frequencies immediately, our equipment might not withstand the energy flux." Aurora turned from her console, meeting Asher's gaze with an unspoken understanding. They exchanged nods. The team would need to work at maximum capacity to stabilize this newly emerging cluster before disaster struck. "We have a plan B," Quasar announced over comms, his voice holding an air of determination. "Let's put it into action." Asher shot Aurora a tight nod as they set their shoulders, steeling themselves for the grueling task ahead. The lab was alive with noise and urgency, but in this moment, everyone was focused on one objective: saving their equipment and understanding the mysteries unfolding beyond their stabilized space bubble. With Asher taking charge, the team plunged headfirst into implementing Plan B, leveraging real-time data to adjust stabilizers and harness an unfamiliar energy form that had suddenly appeared. The stakes were growing by the minute. Will they manage to balance the ever-shifting forces, save precious lives, or is it too late? As the team sprang into action, Aurora felt a surge of adrenaline course through her veins. She had always prided herself on being prepared for any scenario, but this was different. The readings were deviating at an exponential rate, pushing their equipment to the limits of what was thought possible. Stabilizers are straining under the pressure, Asher warned, his fingers flying across the console as he worked on adjusting the algorithm. We're going to have to make some tough choices, quick. Aurora nodded, her eyes darting between the streaming data and Asher's expectant gaze. She knew what had to be done. They needed to draw from their last resort, an unconventional power source that had only recently been discovered. Plan B, Quasar confirmed over comms. It's time to put our backup strategy into play. The words sent a ripple of focus through the team as they coalesced around Asher, who began the arduous task of siphoning the energy from the high-energy cluster into their stabilizers. Astrid worked alongside him, guiding the influx of raw power with an uncanny finesse. Aurora monitored the readings, her mind racing to keep up with the shifting metrics. Every fraction of a second counted, one wrong move, and it would all unravel. Resonant frequency stabilizing, Quasar called out as he watched over the team's work. Keep pushing, Asher. The strain on their equipment showed no signs of easing off. Equipment groaned under the pressure, its usually silent hum like a screaming warning. Then it suddenly gave way with a crunching blast that left everyone breathing. Power surge detected, Astrid shouted as her console screen flashed bright red alert. We're losing Sector 3. Aurora spun to Quasar, desperation clawing at her voice. Sector 3 is falling. We have to act now. Reroutes and compensations won't be enough this time. Quasar nodded silently before barking orders into comms. Fall back to backup. Shield sectors 1-2. But the equipment refused to cooperate, its resilience dwindling as their last hope seemed to slip through their grasp. The room pulsed with urgency. Everyone's senses on edge as they battled against time and physics itself. What other option do we have? Asher demanded from his console. He worked with every shred of skill he possessed to correct the failing algorithm. Sweat-dewed forehead reflected in Astrid's gaze. It's almost there, she said softly, offering a single vote of encouragement before focusing on maintaining control. We can push it too far, Quasar interjected cautiously over comms, but even the odds are we'll still lose. What choice is left? I'm pushing it to maximum capacity, Asher said, his voice low and urgent as he worked on stabilizing the failing algorithm, but I don't think we'll hold out much longer. Aurora nodded grimly, her eyes fixed on the streaming data as she monitored their equipment's vital signs. The readings were dropping precipitously, the once stable frequencies now careening wildly out of control. We need to find another way, Quasar said over comms, his voice firm but worried. The current solution isn't sustainable. Astrid glanced up from her console, her eyes locking onto Asher's as they searched for options. The tension in the room was palpable, every heartbeat ticking away like a countdown timer. Plan C? Asher suggested, his brow furrowed in thought. Quasar hesitated before responding. We can't even consider activating Plan D at this point. We're already pushing the limits of what's possible. Aurora watched as Quasar worked, her mind racing to keep up with the team's frantic efforts. She knew every decision counted. One misstep could spell disaster. What if we try? Astrid started, but Asher cut her off. We can't hold on much longer, he said, his voice laced with frustration. We need a miracle. A sudden jolt of electricity shocked the air, sending equipment sparks flying as an alarm blared through the room. Warning! Energy spike detected, Astrid shouted above the din. Incoming power fluctuation. Quasar's eyes snapped to Asher, and he cursed under his breath. We can't handle this. The strain is too much. Aurora spun toward Quasar, her voice low and urgent. We have to compensate. Now. Quasar hesitated for a heartbeat before grabbing the comms device. Compensators online. Prepare for stabilizer reboot. The room fell silent in anticipation as the team held its collective breath. Would they manage to steady the fragile balance, or would their equipment be overwhelmed by the unforgiving forces beyond their control? Here it goes, Asher whispered, his fingers poised over the console controls. With a burst of energy and hope, the stabilizers groaned back into life. Aurora's eyes locked onto Asher's console as the stabilizers roared back to life. We did it, she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Quasar let out a slow exhale over comms, his words laced with relief. You've managed to stabilize Sector 3. For now. Astrid nodded silently, her eyes still fixed on the console screen, where the erratic readings had finally begun to level off. The room seemed to relax with her, tension seeping from the air like a slow deflating balloon. Asher let out a soft laugh, wiping the sweat from his forehead. For now, he agreed. Quasar's humorless tone brought them all back down to earth. We can't afford now. We need a permanent solution, and fast. Aurora nodded sharply, her focus snapping back onto the task at hand. I've been running simulations, trying to pinpoint the root cause of this failure. It seems it's not just an equipment issue, but a fundamental flaw in our understanding of the resonant frequencies, Asher cut in. She nodded, her gaze flicking between him and Quasar. Exactly. If we adjust the parameters even slightly, we risk destabilizing the entire system. Quasar growled low in his throat, irritation brewing on his face. This isn't a puzzle to be solved by tweaking variables, it's a question of physics itself. Astrid piped up from her console, her voice soft and tentative. But what if I said we could use our observations to modify the algorithm, to account for the distortions? The room fell silent once more, as all eyes turned on to Astrid. We're not looking at incremental adjustments, Asher clarified carefully. We need a fundamental shift in how we approach these frequencies. Quasar snorted, incredulity evident on his face. And you think you have it all figured out now, do you? Aurora intervened before things escalated further. Give her a chance to explain, Quasar, she said firmly but calmly. We can't afford to shut down new ideas at this point. Asher added quietly, besides, if anyone can come up with something we haven't considered yet, it's Astrid. Astrid met their gaze, a hint of triumph creeping into her voice as well. Think about it. If our current approach is fundamentally flawed, shouldn't we at least consider the possibility that there are other approaches? Ones we just haven't thought to try. Her words hung in the air for an uncomfortable moment before Quasar muttered reluctantly, All right, tell us your genius plan. Aurora's face lit with hope. Let her speak, she echoed Asher's earlier sentiment. With a small smile and steady gaze, Astrid began to lay out her vision, one that threatened to redefine everything they thought they knew about controlling the resonant frequencies. Aurora's eyes locked onto Astrid as the young engineer began to explain her theory. We're not just dealing with resonant frequencies, but a complex interplay of quantum fluctuations and gravitational waves. If we can find a way to harmonize these forces, we might be able to stabilize Sector 3 indefinitely. Quasar raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. That's quite a leap, Astrid. Have you crunched the numbers yet? Astrid nodded, her hands flying across the console as she summoned a flurry of simulations and models. The room fell silent as the team studied the data, Asher's brow furrowed in concentration. We can't just harmonize these forces, he said finally. We need concrete evidence that this approach will even work. Astrid leaned forward, her eyes shining with intensity. That's the beauty of it. We don't have to rely on intuition alone. With some clever application of quantum entanglement, and Quasar snorted, interrupting. Quantum what now? You're starting to sound like one of Vexo's old professors. Aurora shot Quasar a silencing glance. Let's focus on the science here. As Astrid launched into another explanation, the sounds of the ship's engines and the soft hum of consoles provided an undercurrent of calm amidst the tension. The team worked in hushed tones, their voices weaving together like the intricate threads of a tapestry. On the view screen, Sector 3 pulsed with a gentle blue glow, a temporary reprieve from the swirling vortex that had threatened to consume them all. For now, they had bought themselves time, but sooner or later they would have to confront the deeper issue, the flaw in their understanding that threatened to destabilize the entire system. In the heart of the ship's core, something was stirring. A new perspective waiting to be born from the ashes of Astrid's bold idea. It was a fragile thread, but one that might weave their way out of the darkness. Aurora's eyes narrowed as she scrutinized the data streaming across Astrid's console. You're suggesting we use quantum entanglement to manipulate Sector 3's resonance frequency? That's a massive gamble. Astrid nodded eagerly, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked out the calculations. I know it sounds extreme, But what if I told you I've been running simulations and found that an inverse quantum lock could potentially... Quasar cut in, his expression incredulous. A quantum lock? You're trying to sell us snake oil here. Asher intervened, his voice measured. Hold on, Quasar. Let Astrid finish what she's got. Astrid took a deep breath before continuing. I'm proposing that we inject an entangled particle into Sector 3's energy field. If it syncs correctly with the resonant frequency, it should create a quantum feedback loop that stabilizes. Theoretically, Quasar muttered. Quasar shook his head. You know what this plan sounds like to me? A Hail Mary shot with a desperate team clinging to any lifeline we can find. Astrid's face fell, but Aurora stepped forward, her voice steady. We've tried every conventional approach. It's time to think outside the box. Asher agreed, his brow furrowed in thought. I think Astrid might be onto something here. What if it works? As they hashed over the plan, a faint tremor coursed through the ship. A warning siren pierced the tension, echoing off the consoles. What's happening? Quasar demanded. Astrid's face went white as she frantically scanned the data. It can't be. Sector 3 is destabilizing again. The lights flickered once before steadying. On the view screen, a massive wave distorted the glow of Sector 3, an omen that seemed to validate their worst fears. We don't have much time, Aurora said grimly. We need this plan to work. With trembling fingers, Astrid initiated the countdown sequence for the entangled particle injection. An expectant hush fell across the comms room. Only when the moment of truth arrived would they know whether Astrid's unorthodox method had offered a path out of their desperation or sealed their fate forever. Aurora's eyes narrowed as she scrutinized the data streaming across Astrid's console. You're suggesting we use quantum entanglement to manipulate Sector 3's resonance frequency? That's a massive gamble. Astrid nodded eagerly, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked out the calculations. I know it sounds extreme, but what if I told you I've been running simulations and found that an inverse quantum lock could potentially... Quasar cut in, his expression incredulous. A quantum lock? You're trying to sell us snake oil here. Asher intervened, his voice measured. Hold on, Quasar. Let Astrid finish what she's got. Astrid took a deep breath before continuing. I'm proposing that we inject an entangled particle into Sector 3's energy field. If it syncs correctly with the resonant frequency, it should create a quantum feedback loop that stabilizes. Theoretically, Quasar muttered. Quasar shook his head. You know what this plan sounds like to me? A Hail Mary shot with a desperate team clinging to any lifeline we can find. Astrid's face fell, but Aurora stepped forward, her voice steady. We've tried every conventional approach. It's time to think outside the box. Asher agreed, his brow furrowed in thought. I think Astrid might be onto something here. What if it works? As they hashed over the plan, a faint tremor coursed through the ship's superstructure. The comms room's consoles hummed with activity, displaying a blur of data and schematics. We need to do this now, Aurora urged, her voice rising above the din. Sector 3's instability is getting worse by the minute. Astrid's hands flew across the controls, initiating the countdown sequence for the entangled particle injection. The room held its collective breath as the seconds ticked down. 10, 9, 8. Astrid counted out loud, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Quasar shot Aurora a warning look. This is crazy, just plain crazy. We've tried everything else. What makes you think this will work? Astrid stopped counting and spun around to face Quasar. Her eyes blazed with defiance. Because I ran the simulations, Quasar. Hundreds of them. And there's a 32.7% chance it will work. 8, 7. Astrid continued her countdown. The view screen flickered, displaying an ever-turbulent view of Sector 3. Aurora felt her heart sink, but Asher just nodded thoughtfully. Tell you what, Quasar, if this works, and I'm not saying much, maybe then they'll take us seriously. Quasar snorted in disgust, while Astrid ignored him, lost in the countdown. 4, 3, 2, she breathed, her fingers poised over the controls. The room was holding its breath, trapped in that moment of tension, when, 1, Astrid shouted, plunging the ship forward into the unknown. A faint tremor shook the ship's core as the entangled particle injection began. On the view screen, Sector 3's light pulsed violently, responding to the quantum feedback loop. But would it be a fix, or a failure.